Hi, Danny.
Hey, Professor.
Professor,
Yep.
I have a quick question. How
Mhm.
come incremental analysis is more reliable on choosing a better option?
Mhm. Oh, the reason is you're basically making a choice between an alternative that has a lower cost and an alternative that has a higher cost, right? Um, and so the idea is that if you choose the lower cost option, you're going to have some cash left over, right? Because in theory, you've budgeted enough money to go with the higher cost option. What incremental analysis will tell you is that if you go with the lower cost option, then what you can do with the money that you have left over is you can invest that in something else, right? That's why we compare it to the MARR. So the MARR basically represents, saying that if you took your money and deposit that into into a savings account with that MARR, then you would earn that interest rate on that money. And so you would kind of split your money into two investments. And so what the incremental analysis will tell you is that if you should do that, if you should split your money between the lower cost investment and the MARR, or if you should put everything into the higher cost option, and that'll tell you which is going to give you more money in the long run.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. Mhm. Yeah, I did get a little bit sick over the last weekend, so I'm kind of been battling a cold this whole week. Oh man, I hope you feel better soon. Oh yeah. Yeah, same here. Is there any remedy for runny nose besides medicine? Yeah, just rest, just make sure your body's rested, drink lots of fluids, and that's always the best way to get over sickness. Yeah. Man, everyone's getting sick. Yeah, take care of yourselves, everybody. All right, it's 1 o'clock, so let's go ahead and get started. All right, so good afternoon, everyone. How's everyone doing today? Besides sick, it seems like a lot of people are sick. Good, thumbs up, it's good. All right, so we're going to be continuing our lecture notes. So we're starting a new one today. So this is the last topic that we're covering in economics, and so it's going to be inflation, right? And so I anticipate probably we'll do this today and probably finish this up on Tuesday, and then I'll probably do maybe one more lecture on entrepreneurship, right? So I forgot about this actually this semester. So usually I have like I have a 1 lecture workshop on entrepreneurship that I usually give at the beginning of the semester, but I kind of forgot about it this semester, and so I'll probably assuming we finish this inflation stuff, then we'll do the entrepreneurship workshop on Thursday, and then after next week that's it for economics, and so after that we're going to start moving into the ethics portion of the class. Which is kind of the other half of engineering economics and professionalism, right? Okay. And so for the inflation stuff, it's we're not going to go too much in depth with it because there's definitely a lot that we can cover here. But I just want to make you guys aware of kind of what inflation is in general, just because I feel like it's a term that's kind of thrown around a lot, especially in the news and on social media and things like that. But I think we'll finally get like a good definition for that today. But we're not going to do too many calculations for it. And so in the past, I've tried to assign inflation problems, but there's kind of a big gap between like kind of beginner inflation problems and intermediate inflation problems. And so there's kind of a huge gap in between there. And I don't feel like I don't really feel like covering that big gap because I think it kind of takes away from a lot of the stuff that we've been covered. So I think my focus this year is going to be just let's cover the basics of inflation. Let's understand what it is. And let's do some basic calculations. And then, of course, if you're interested in learning more, I think there's a wealth of resources out there there's a lot out there that you can research. Yeah. Yeah. All right. Okay. Let's see other announcements. I posted the newest homework already. I'm not sure if I said that on Tuesday. And so homework 5 is going to cover more of the tax stuff and the replacement decisions. Okay. And so that's going to be due, I think, kind of right before the midterm. So I think that's going to be due in 12 days from now. Right. So not next week, but the week after that. Okay. All right. And so are there any questions I can answer before we get started? All right. So let's get started on. So then the topic for today is inflation. All right. And so inflation, if you kind of watch the news at all, or if you hang around social media and you hear millennials complaining on social media, like you'll hear the word inflation a lot, right? And I think there's kind of a lot of, I think people kind of roughly kind of understand what it is, but an exact definition is not something that's really thrown out there a lot, unless you're really taking like a business or economics class. But luckily for you, you are in an economics class, and so we are going to be going over the exact definition. Okay, all right. And so let's first kind of put this in context, with everything else that we've done so far in this class, right? So up to this point, we've been talking a lot about cash and cash flows and money, right? Right. So we've done things like, looked at if you make a big purchase, how much is that going to cost you? How much revenue is that going to make you over time? How much maintenance are you going to pay for that, right? And so we've been doing everything in terms of, just raw dollar amounts, okay? And we've talked about how the value of money can change over time because of interest rates, right? And so because of, the way investing and the way economy works, we can have interest rates that grow our money with time, and that affects the value of our money, okay? Right. And so I bring this up again because I want to tell you that inflation is separate from this, right? And so so everything that we've heard up to this point, and to say that our money can grow with time, with an interest rate, that's separate from inflation. Okay, so inflation has really nothing to do with that at all. Okay, and so when people talk about inflation, they're not really talking about money or cash per se, right? But really, what inflation refers to is what you can actually purchase with that money. Okay. Right. Because it's one thing to take your money and invest it into stocks and have that money grow with time, right? Eventually, you're going to withdraw that money and you're going to buy stuff with it, right? And so inflation refers to how much purchasing power that your money has. Okay. Right. Or if you want to put it more simply, inflation does not really, it has nothing to do with cash. It has more to do with what are the prices of goods. Okay. Okay. And so generally, the prices of goods is going to increase with time. Okay. And so that's called inflation. And so if you have a fixed amount of cash, and so let's go back to the very first analogy that we started with in this class. And so let's say that you take $100 bill, you stick it in your pocket, and then maybe you don't wash your pants for 10 years or something like that, and you find that $100 bill again, right? And so 10 years from now, all the things that you can buy with that $100 bill is going to be a lot less, right? And so today, you can probably take that $100 bill and maybe pay for 10 good lunches, eating out at like a fast food place or something like that, right? So I'm assuming you have about $10 per meal. Maybe 10 years from now, that same fast food meal, right? The same burger, fries, drink, maybe that's going to cost you maybe $15 now, right? And so that $100 bill is by itself, that $100 bill didn't lose any value. It's still $100. But the amount of stuff that you can actually buy with it has gone down because prices have went up, okay? And so inflation is kind of another way to express that future dollars are usually less valuable than present dollars, okay? Okay, because money that you have right now, you can use it to purchase goods that are priced right now, right? Because generally, if you wait, the longer you wait to buy something, the price of that thing is going to go up. Okay. And so that's what inflation is. And so the opposite of inflation is called deflation. And so deflation makes it so that prices go down over time. Which can happen. It's not an impossibility, but generally, especially over long periods of time, deflation doesn't happen. And so you might have deflation over maybe like a 1-year period, but generally, after it dips down, it kind of goes back up again. So generally speaking, over long periods of time, the prices of all goods are just going to go up and up and up. Okay, as long as people are willing to buy it, then prices will just keep going up and up. Okay. All right, any questions on this? Question. So inflation shows how future dollars are less than now. And so this is different. And so before we talked about how future money is less valuable because you can grow it through an interest rate, right? So this is kind of a whole nother separate factor, right? And so because of inflation, any money that you have in the future will be even less valuable because the prices of everything that you want to buy with money has gone up, right? And so unless you're one of the ultra rich people who kind of just use their money as kind of like a high score for how successful they are in life, generally people make money to eventually spend it on something, right? And so you want to spend it on house, car, your necessities, food, and all that stuff, right? And so inflation is going to affect pretty much everyone, because the money that you make, you're going to want to spend it on stuff, and that stuff, the price of that stuff is going to go up over time because of inflation. Yeah. All right. Okay, and so before we jump into some calculations with inflation, let's talk just briefly about what causes it in general. All right. And so this list isn't all encompassing. And so there's definitely more, and there's a lot of nuance to this list, but with kind of the limited amount of time that we have now, I think this list is kind of a good place to start. Okay. All right. So number one. So the first cause for inflation is the money supply. Okay. And so this is especially relevant from recent events because of COVID and because of everyone getting the stimulus checks, right? But the idea with the money supply is that the absolute amount of cash in the circulating in the economy has an effect on prices. Okay. Okay. And so generally speaking, the more money there is in circulation, and so basically the more money that gets printed by the Federal Reserve, then prices are also going to go up. Okay. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. And so the federal agency that controls how much money is in circulation is called the Federal Reserve. Okay. Or I should say they're not in charge of it. It's not that they control it, but they try to regulate the amount of money in circulation as much as possible. Okay. Okay. And so this is kind of the main reason why it's really difficult for the government to just print money, right? And so you might hear that phrase said in different places, right? And so why doesn't and so people ask why doesn't the government just print a ton more money and just give it to everyone, right? Then everyone can be rich. But if they do that, then if everyone has a lot more money, then prices are just naturally going to go up and up and up. Okay, and once prices go up, it's kind of hard to bring them down. So it's usually kind of a one-way street. And so the Federal Reserve has to be really careful with the amount of money that they put in circulation to kind of regulate the prices as much as possible. Yeah. Yeah. Yep. Yep. Yeah. And so they try to protect the banks, yeah, as much as possible. So that's part of their responsibilities as the Federal Reserve. So, yeah. If I was kind of much more knowledgeable economics, I can comment more on this, but that's kind of the limit to to my knowledge. Yeah. All right, question. So I saw an increase in flipping houses mid quarantine. Yeah, housing prices are bad right now. Can they somehow unprint money to lower prices? No, they can't. It's they can't take basically once they print money, they assume it's going to be on ownership and private citizens, and so they can't take that away from people. And so I don't think anyone would be happy if the Federal Reserve saying, oh, we're taking out $1,000 from your bank account to try to fix the prices, but no one's going to be happy with that. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, but that's not to say money does get lost, and so money money does get lost every year. I mean, people lose dollar bills all the time. It gets burned or otherwise misplaced, or crime happens, and so money does go missing. At least officially off the books. And so the Federal Reserve they are printing money every year to kind of replace that loss of money. But they have to be kind of really careful about that. Yeah. All right, number 2. They call me in Gotham City. The supply and demand also creates a bit of inflation. Yeah. So this is one of the primary causes for inflation. Yeah, for how much supply and how much demand there is for money. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Right, exchange rates. And so another factor that can cause inflation is the price of the dollar relative to other currencies for other countries. Okay. And so I say dollar here just because, we're in America, but, this of course applies to every other country as well. And so the relative strength of the national currency will affect the prices of those goods. Yeah. Mhm. All right. Next, we have something called cost push inflation. Okay. And so the idea with cost push inflation is that the companies that sell you your goods, they can increase the prices when they try to push more of their operational costs onto the consumer. Okay. Question. So how is it that the euro is worth more compared to the dollar, yet the US is still wealthier? Yeah, that's a great question. I can't say that I'm the most qualified to answer this. My knowledge of economics is kind of more just from an engineering management point of view. But my understanding is that, because the euro is kind of the combined kind of strength of all the European nations, it's more than just the strength of all their individual economies kind of add together. It's more the strength of kind of the added liability of all of their governments combined. And so, if one part of the European Union is failing, then another one kind of swoop in and pick it up. And so there's less risk associated with that. And so that kind of drives up the cost that drives up the value of the euro relative to the US. So that's my very crude understanding of it, but I'm sure there's a lot more nuance and a lot more details about how that is. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so the fact that it existed, I'm actually not sure when it came to be, but if it did exist, before the U.S., then that's an added history of trust as well, right? And so that adds more to trust, and that kind of adds more value to the euro. Yeah. Mm-hmm. All right. Any other questions on this? Great questions so far, guys. Really glad you guys you're into this one. Okay. All right. And so the last cause for inflation, which is I think the one that everyone kind of understands, is the idea of supply and demand, right? So the specific name for this, at least that we're giving for this lecture, is called demand pull inflation. Okay. And so with demand pull, as if the demand for the goods from the consumers increase, and so more people want to buy it, then of course companies are going to charge more money for it, so they can make more and more money. Okay. Right. And so that's just kind of good old supply and demand. Okay. Right. All right. And so those are kind of the I would say four the bigger causes for inflation. So then there's other stuff too. And we'll talk about this later, where individual markets or individual classes of goods, those can inflate at different rates. And so these four causes here, I would say these are kind of causes for inflation on kind of a national scale, so overall inflation. But but for kind of individual markets, and so let's say for food or for cars or for housing or for gas, right? Each of those can inflate at different rates depending on how the economy is going for those. But we'll come back to that, you know, a bit later when we talk about price indices. Okay. But let's get into some of the math behind inflation, right? And so let's define some different you know, rates, and let's see how they all interact. Right? All right. And so I have three different definitions for you. Okay. And so the first is the you know, we're going to start off with just the inflation rate. Okay. And the symbol that we'll give for this is F. Okay. Because I is already taken, and so I is already taken. We use I for the interest rate already, and so we have to give inflation rate a different symbol, and so we go with F. Okay, and so the inflation rate is basically the rate at which prices will increase per year. Okay, and so pretty straightforward. And so just as a quick example, right? Let's say that today you can buy lunch at the Habit for $10, right? Okay. If we have an inflation rate of, let's say, 5%, okay, that means that next year, then the price of lunch is going to go up by 5%. So next year, lunch will cost $10.50, right? Because it went up by 5%. Okay. All right. Next, we have the what's called the real interest rate. Okay. And so this is I apostrophe or I prime. Okay. It's a really scuffed I. Let me do it again. I prime. Okay. And so this is a type of interest rate. And so I'm going to introduce two different interest rates for you because then they because now that we're taking inflation into account. Okay. And so the real interest rate, this kind of measures the basically the real value of money. Okay. Or it measures how the real value of money is growing with time. Another way that I like to think about real interest rates is it represents how much purchasing power you're gaining over time. Okay. Okay. And so sometimes this is called the inflation-free interest rate because basically, you know, this interest rate will be inflation-proof. And so, you know, you can look at the real interest rate and say that, you know, let's say you have a real interest rate of like 2%, then you can say that my purchasing power is going to go up by 2% each year. Okay. Okay. And so if you're given a real interest rate, you can say with certainty that this is already inflation proof. So inflation is already kind of taken into account, and so you can kind of have faith in this market interest rate, or real interest rate. Sorry. Okay. All right. Any questions on this?
Professor,
Yep. Mm-hmm.
how it how it sees how much your purchasing power is gaining, because wouldn't it be if it's interesting?
Oh, go ahead. Oh, sorry. You're kind of scuffed a little bit.
Oh, I apologize. I guess I'm just kind of confused on how it's gaining with time instead of losing with time, because wouldn't inflation cause it to, like, the amount you could buy to decrease?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And so what I'm going to introduce next is the market interest rate. So I think it'll be a bit more clear once we do an example. But let's say that you have a savings account which gives you like a 10% interest rate, right? And so your actual money is gaining by 10% each year, but that's not the amount that your purchasing power is increasing. And so because of inflation, and so let's say that inflation is maybe 8%. Then your amount of purchasing power is only gaining by a little bit, because inflation, because your cash is going like this, and then inflation is going like this, right? And then the gap in between these two, that's the real interest rate in between them. And so what you'll see is that when you're investing your money, what they'll show you, and like what you'll see in your stocks, is probably the market interest rate, which is what we're going to introduce next. But the actual value, the actual purchasing power that you're gaining is actually much less than that, because prices are also going up at the same time. Yeah.
Oh, okay, I see. Thank you.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Okay. All right. So let's define the market interest rate next. All right. And so the market rate, we give just the symbol I. Okay. Right. And so the market rate, basically this will define how much your actual cash is growing. And so the cash that you can actually see, you can actually touch, you invest it in an investment. This is how much it's actually growing. Okay. And so if you take your money, you invest it in a bank, you put it in a mutual fund, you put it in stocks or whatever, and you get an interest rate from that, and you can actually see your money actually going up with time, hopefully, depending on the market. Then that rate of return, that's the market rate. Okay. Okay. And so this is when banks and investment firms, they actually advertise their rates, this is what they're advertising. Okay. Right. And so one general rule of thumb, and so if we assume that inflation is always going to be positive, and so we kind of assume that deflation doesn't happen, generally what you'll see is that the market rate is going to be greater than the real interest rate. Okay. Okay. Because even though your money is growing at the market rate, right? And so any money that you invest is growing at that market rate, but prices are also going up at the same time too. And so the real value that you're gaining, and so the real kind of purchasing power that you're gaining is kind of it's almost the difference in between the two rates, although not quite. Okay. And so the formula that actually relates these three quantities is given by the following, right? And so we have I, which remember is the market rate, is equal to the real interest rate, okay, plus F, right? And then we also add this other factor here, which accounts for the fact that things just because there's a little bit of nonlinearity in their relationship. Okay, and so remember this I right here, this is the market rate. This right here is the real rate, and F is the inflation rate. Okay, and so this is kind of a mathematical formula that that we can use to relate these three. Okay, all right. And so up to this point, we haven't really been differentiating between market rate and real interest rate. And so how can you tell which one is which? Because a lot of times most problems won't actually tell you. And so there's some general rules of thumb that you can use to determine whether you're looking at a market rate or a real interest rate. Okay. All right. And so the first rule is that if you're looking at the interest rate at a savings account or a loan or an investment, this is usually the market rate. Okay. Okay. Because that's basically a representation of how much the cash is going to be growing. The actual cash is going to be growing with time. Okay. But if you're doing a budgeting for an engineering project and they ask you to use an interest rate for that, then that's usually given in terms of the real rate. Okay. Okay. And so for most of the problems that we've been doing, been doing mostly problems of category B right there. And so we've been mostly working with the real interest rates. Okay. But for all the inflation problems that we're going to do, you should read the problem carefully and see, what type of interest rate are we giving? All right, question. So is it the same variable I that we've been using prior to this lecture? So before we haven't been making any distinction. So before we've just been using just interest rate. But that interest rate can either represent a market rate or a real rate depending on the context. And so for most of our cases, they've actually been represented by the real rate, right? Because we've been doing kind of engineering budgeting, engineering kind of cost forecasting, right? And so because of that, in that context, that's usually given in terms of the real rate. But when you're doing if you're talking just about raw cash, right? And so cash that you're putting into a savings account and you're growing with time, that's the market rate. So it can definitely be a bit confusing, and so I think this is why inflation can be a little bit of a sticking point in this class. But hopefully this next example I think hopefully makes it a little bit more clear. Right? All right. So before I get to that example, are there any questions on this? Okay. All right, so I like this example a lot just because it's, I think it makes the definitions between these three things really clear, but it's also kind of a little bit of a silly example. And so, I think at this point, I think the guy from our math problems when we were in elementary school has become kind of a meme. And so, I think the meme is like, John bought 47 watermelons and he gave 30 of them away. And so, the question is, why are you buying 47 watermelons, John? And so this is kind of in the same vein, although not nearly as ridiculous, right? All right, and so let's say that we are in the perspective of a professional golfer, and she recently won a tournament. Okay. Okay. And what she wants to do is she wants to take some of her winnings and invest that into a bank. Okay. Okay. And in fact, she's going to take $1,000 and she's going to invest it in a bank that has an interest rate of 5.5%. Okay. All right. And the reason she's doing this is because she's going to take that $1,000 and think about what do professional golf players like to buy. Of course, they like to buy golf balls, right? Like, what else would professional golfers want to buy? And so she's going to invest that $1,000 so that she can buy golf balls in a year. Okay. Right. So it's her golf ball fund, I guess. Golf carts. Yes. Yes. All right. And so let's assume an inflation rate of 2%. Okay. And let's also say that today, golf balls cost $5 per ball. Okay. That seems like a lot, but I don't play golf, and so I can't really comment on this. But that kind of seems like a lot for a golf ball that you're probably going to hit into someone's yard anyway. Okay. All right. And so this is this problem has 3 different parts. Okay. Right. So part A, let's identify the three rates. Okay. So let's identify the market rate. Let's identify the inflation rate and what the real interest rate is. Okay. Okay. And part B, let's compute how many golf balls can she buy today with that money. Okay. And then compare this to how many golf balls that she can buy in a year. Okay. 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 So $5 isn't that much. All right. Okay. And so that's part B. And the part C, we're going to repeat this problem, but we're going to increase the inflation rate to 8%. All right. And so that's the problem. Yep. Mm-hmm. All right. Any questions on the setup for the problem? Okay. All right. So we're given. So let's do part A first. So part A is to identify what all the different rates are. Okay. And so right away we're given an interest rate of 5.5%. Okay. And we're told that this is the rate that the bank is going to offer her to invest her money with them, okay? And so what is this 5.5%? So is this a market rate? Is it a real interest rate, or is it a inflation rate? Right. So because this 5.5% is offered by the bank, and it's going to represent how much that $1,000 is going to grow, then this is a market rate. Right, exactly. Okay. Right. Next, we have the 2%. And so the 2%, we're told just straight up that this is the inflation rate. And so, we can go ahead and compute that, or we can stay that. Okay. All right. And so what we don't know here is we don't know the real interest rate. Okay. So let's go ahead and compute that. And so we're not given it in the problem, but we can solve for it using our formula, right? Because remember, our formula is I is equal to I prime plus F plus I prime F, okay? And so let's solve this equation for I prime, okay? And so what we get is I prime is equal to I minus F divided by I plus, or 1 plus F, okay? And we get a real interest rate of 3.4% approximately. Okay. All right. And so let's keep this in mind, and I'll show you how that relates to part B. Okay. And so I think, knowing that this real interest rate is 3.4%, and then going through part B will kind of make it clear what the real interest rate represents. Okay. All right. Any questions on this? Okay. Part B. And so part B, let's first compute how many golf balls you can buy today. Right? Okay. And so today she has $1,000, right? And so if the price of golf balls is $5 per ball, okay, then this is going to be 200 golf balls, right? Okay. All right. And so that's today. And so let's do that calculation a year from now. Okay. And so in 1 year from now, the price of golf balls are going to increase by 2%. Okay. Okay, and so the new price of golf balls is going to be $5 times 1.02, okay, because they increased by 2%. And so if we do that, we get 510, okay. Okay. Meanwhile, the $1,000 that she had in the bank grew by 5.5%, okay. So she had $1,000 multiplied by 1.055, okay. And so the money that she has in the bank has grown by $55, and so now she has $1,055, okay. All right. Right, and so if we divide these two numbers to compute how many golf balls she can buy in a year, we have 1,055 divided by 510, and what we get is 207 golf balls. Okay. Right. And so let me do all this, hopefully pretty straightforward, but let me do one more calculation right here to kind of connect this calculation back to the real interest rate, right? So remember, the real interest rate that we got here was 3.4%, right? Right. Let me take a ratio. So let me take a ratio of the golf balls you can buy in 1 year versus the golf ball that you can buy today, right? And so if we do 207 divided by 200, okay, we perform this division, what we get is about 1.035. Okay. Look at the end of this ratio right here compared to the real interest rate, right? And so what this ratio is telling us, the fact that she can buy 207 golf balls a year later, means that she can buy 3.5% more golf balls in a year after she invested her money. Okay. Okay. Or in other words, what we can say is that her purchasing power for golf balls has gone up by 3.5% in a year. Okay. And so you can see that this number really closely correlates to the real interest rate, right? And so, the fact that these two are the same kind of shows you what the real interest rate represents, right? And so, to kind of put it in summary, so the real interest rate, it accounts for the fact that yes, your money is growing at the market rate, right? But the prices for the goods that you want are also growing. And so the real interest rate represents how much more of those goods can you buy, which is basically kind of the difference between the market rate and the inflation rate. Okay. Okay. Any questions on that? Okay. All right. And so let's do part C of this problem really quick, just so that we can run through the calculations one more time. All right. In part C of this problem, question. So where did the 1.02 come from? 1.02 is for the interest rates, or the inflation rate. Sorry. So remember, the inflation rate is 2%. And so that tells us that the price of golf balls is going to increase by 2%. And so we multiply by 1.02 to get the new price of golf balls. Yeah. Mm-hmm. All right. So in part C is we're going to repeat the calculations, but for an inflation rate of 8%. Okay. All right, and so now we have an inflation rate that's greater than our market interest rate. Okay, and so this is going to make a big difference in our calculation. Okay, and so let's recompute the real interest rate. Okay, so remember, I prime, this is equal to I minus F divided by 1 plus F. Okay. And so now that F is 8% here, but the market rate is still the same at 5.5%, then now we have a real interest rate of minus 2.3%. Okay. And so now that the inflation rate is so high, now that it's outstripping the rate at which our money itself is growing, this means that we're actually going to be able to purchase less in a year. Okay. All right. And so let's go ahead and apply this to our golf balls. Okay. Okay. And so I'm going to go ahead and skip through kind of the a lot of the work. And instead, I'm just going to work directly with this real interest rate, right? And so the amount of golf balls that we can purchase is the following, right? And so, Remember, 200 golf balls is how many golf balls we could purchase today, okay? Right, and so if we multiply this by 1 plus I prime, this represents how many golf balls we can buy a year from now, okay? And so with a real interest rate of minus 0.23%, then this quantity right here is going to be 0.977, okay? And so we perform that calculation, and what we get is 195 golf balls. Okay. Right. And so because the inflation rate was so high in this case, then that made it so that we can't buy as many golf balls as we did before. Okay. All right. Any questions on this part here? Okay. All right. And so you know, that was kind of the golf ball example. Right? Okay, so now that we have kind of a good grasp on the difference between the market rate and the real rate, let's give a little bit more definitions, right? And in particular, let's give some definitions on the types, on how we can actually value the money itself. Okay. All right, so there's two types of money that we can keep track of. Yeah. All right, question. So how can I explain again how I got the 1.02 for part B? Sure. All right, so this 1.02. Remember the inflation rate here was 2%, right? And so that means the price of our golf balls is going to increase by 2% each year, right? And so this 1.02 represents how much the price of the golf balls is going to increase. Okay. Right, because the inflation rate, remember, that represents how much prices are going to go up each year, represented as a percentage. And so an inflation rate of 2% means that, you know, we can take our prices and multiply it by 1.02. Exactly. Yes. Yeah. It's exact. And so it's exactly the way that we do interest calculations. So we do 1 plus the rate as a decimal, and then we multiply that by our price. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Does that make more sense? Make more sense, everybody? Great, awesome. Okay, so types of money for inflation. So the first type of money that we'll go over, oops, still red. All right, the first type of money that we'll go over is called actual dollars. Okay. And so actual dollars, this is you know, and this part's always really hard because the two types of money are called actual and real, and so I use kind of both of them kind of in my natural speak. So actual dollars is like tangible money that people have in their hands, they can touch it, it's in their accounts, right? Okay. And so if you go down to the restaurant and you buy a meal, you do that with actual dollars, right? You deposit, you get your paycheck from your job, that's actual dollars. You pay money to your parents because they you know, because they asked for it, that's actual money, right? You give money to your uncle because he lost $400 in poker and he is pressuring you to give you money, that's actual money, right? So actual money is what you actually, you know, exchange. Okay. All right. And so actual money is physical. It's you can touch it. Okay. Okay. The other type of money that we have is called real dollars, okay? And so real dollars are not actual real, are not actually tangible or physical, right? And so real dollars are more of a theoretical concept of purchasing power within a time period. Okay? Okay. And so, you know, whenever you're talking about real dollars, you have to specify a time period. You have to specify a base year. Okay. Okay. And that base year will basically be, you know, where we're looking at purchasing power for, right? And so basically the way that you use real dollars is say, you know, let's think back to like 1990, right? And so 1990, we say that, you know, if we have $5 real in 1990, that's $5 worth of stuff in 1990, okay? And so another way that you can think about it is it represents the value of goods in that time period. Okay. All right. And so this is where I think the inflation unit kind of gets a little bit confusing because you know, we can take these two concepts of money and then we can do exchanges or conversions between them. Okay. Okay. And oftentimes, you know, if you're budgeting for like a long-term engineering project, you have to think about these two things, right? Because you know, let's say that you're an engineering manager, you're in charge of a project that's going to take 10 years, right? And so you have the actual amount of money that you can use to budget over that you can use to spend stuff over the time. But you have to keep in mind that the prices of goods are also going to increase over that time as well, right? And so it's good to have a concept of both, you know, the actual, you know, physical amount of money that you have versus how much purchasing power that money is going to give you over that time as well. Okay. And so next, you know, we're gonna go over the rules for conversion between these two types of money, and it gets a little bit complicated. And so you know, this part gets a little bit confusing, but you know, we'll do a couple examples with this just to kind of illustrate it. But you know, but just getting the difference between actual and real, I think is already going to be a little bit challenging. So definitely, you know, read through these definitions a few times. You know, go through the examples that we're going to do, and you know, and think about you know, what they represent. Okay. All right. Any questions on this before we jump into the conversion rules? Okay. All right. So let's talk about how to convert between these two. Okay. And there's four rules basically. Okay. Because you're not only converting between actual and real dollars, but you're also converting across different time periods as well, right? All right, so rule number one. And so rule number one is with regards to converting actual to actual in a different time period, okay? Okay. And so you're basically converting an actual amount of money in one time period to an actual amount of money, maybe sometime in the future, or maybe sometime in the past, right? And so for this one, you're going to use the compound interest tables, just like we always have. But the interest rate that you're going to use is the market rate. Okay. All right. Rule number 2. And so when rule number 2, is when you're converting real to real, okay? Okay, and so when you're doing this conversion right here, you're going to use the real interest rate. Okay, and there's a caveat for rule 2 too. And so for rule 2, remember, whenever you're considering real dollars, they have to have what's called a base year, and that represents the purchasing power in that year. Okay, and so when you're converting between these two real dollars in different time periods, the actual amounts of money will be in different time periods, but the base year has to be the same. Okay. Okay. All right. And so besides that caveat, rule number 2, still not too bad. Okay. All right. Rule number 3. And so rule number 3 is the first one where we're converting between actual and real. Okay. And so when you're converting actual dollars in one time period, okay. And so when you're converting actual dollars in one time period to real dollars in the same time period, okay. In this case, you don't use any interest rate. Okay. Okay. Right. And so basically, what this is saying is that when these two are aligned at the same time with the same base year, these two are exactly the same thing. And so you don't need to convert. You don't need to apply any factor to convert between them. Okay. Okay. Right. And so I think the easiest way to see this is to think about the money that you have today, right? And so if you reach into your wallet and you pull out, whatever money is there, $5, $10, $20, that represents let's say you have $20, right? And so let's say that's $20 of actual money that you have right now. You can feel it, you can touch it, you can smell it, you can taste it if you're into that. Don't do that. Money's pretty dirty. So don't lick your money. But that also represents $20 worth of stuff that you can buy today, October 21st, 2021, right? And so that's 20 actual dollars and also $20 worth of 2021 stuff, right? And so that's why you don't have to convert between these two, because they represent kind of the same thing. Okay. All right. 4 is when we get a little bit complicated. Okay. And so in rule 4, we're going to convert between real dollars at some different time n, okay, real dollars at some different time n, to actual dollars at the same time n, okay. And I forgot to mention that the real dollars, the base year for the real dollars is different than n, okay? And so let's say that the base year for the actual dollars is at some time t, okay? And so the real dollars that we're evaluating, it has some base year t, but we're evaluating it at a different year n, okay? And so if you're in this case, then what you're going to do is you're going to apply the inflation rate for n minus t periods. Okay. And so this is the first time that the inflation rate makes an appearance. Okay. All right. So that fourth one, probably doesn't make any sense right now. And so, I think that'll probably make more sense with an example. But I think we only have 5 minutes left right now, and so I'm going to draw an image here that kind of summarizes this whole thing, and then we'll hopefully that will show how to use the rules then from a visual standpoint. Okay. All right, question. So does that say actual time? Does that say same time for actual dollars? Yes. Yeah, same time n. Mm-hmm. All right. Any questions on this stuff before I draw the graphic? Okay. All right. So let me draw the graphic just to kind of illustrate this for you guys. Okay. And so let's say that we have a timeline here. Okay. And so let's say that we have some time t. Okay. Okay. And then some future time n. So let's say we can say t is today and n is sometime in the future. Okay. All right. And so let's say that we want to convert actual dollars. Okay. And so I'll denote that as A with the $sign at t. Okay. Versus actual dollars at n. Okay. And so we're just doing a simple conversion between actual dollars at one time period and actual dollars at another one. Okay. And so the way that we're going to do this conversion, so this is rule 1 on the previous page. Okay. The way that we do this conversion is with the market rate I. Okay. All right. Next, let's consider conversion between a real amount of money, okay, which has a base year of t. Okay. And this is being evaluated at time t, okay? Okay, and then we're evaluating that same real dollars with the same base year, and so the base year is still t, but we're evaluating that sometime in the future, right? And so basically what this is saying is, how much purchasing power, how much, let's say that we're looking in the past, right? So let's say how much 1990 purchasing power, how much, how much like of $100 of purchasing power in 1990 would you have today, right? And so the rate that you use for this is the real rate, okay? All right. All right. And so that's rule 2. Rule 3 is between these two, right? Okay. And so rule 3 basically says that if you're considering actual dollars at some time t and the purchasing power at that same time period, okay, so everything is t, then you don't do any conversion, okay? Right. But if you're converting between these two, then you're going to apply the inflation rate F for n minus t periods, okay? Right. Another way for us to say that, another way for us to kind of describe that orange line there, or for rule 4, is to say that we're stripping away inflation from that amount of money. Okay. All right. And so, you know, I know probably this diagram still doesn't make too much sense, and so, you know, I do have another example right after this to kind of hopefully, you know, make it a little bit more sense, but you know, but we don't have time for it right now because we're just about out of time. Okay. And so when we pick this up on Tuesday, you know, we're going to pick it up with that example, and hopefully that'll put this diagram here in context. Okay. All right. Any final questions before we wrap it up for the week?
Can you briefly go back to page 20?
Yes.
I didn't catch everything.
Yep. All right. All right, so I'll stick around if you have any more questions. I do want to say that I'm going out of town this weekend, and so I'm going to Ohio for a friend's wedding actually, and so I'll be unavailable starting tomorrow morning. And so if you can email me over the weekend, that's fine, but I probably won't respond until Monday. Right. So have a great weekend, everybody. You know, stay safe, stay healthy. You know, if you're getting sick, you know, please take care of yourself, and I'll see you guys on Tuesday. When's my wedding? You know, we haven't started planning yet. We're looking to buy a house first. Yeah.
Professor.
Yeah.
Can you go back to the last page?
Yeah. Oh, is or someone needed this page. So are you good with this page here? Okay, I'm gonna assume yes. Okay. All right, question. So does inflation depend on Wall Street or the global economic market? Absolutely it does. Yeah. And so it's you know, the four factors that we covered is kind of, you know, the, I would say more the major ones, but definitely the global market, global economy that drives the price of things. You know, especially in today's world where the economy is very very global, and so, you know, we rely on a lot of international goods in our you know, in our economy. And so, you know, and that also says that, you know, things like tariffs, things like shipping costs, you know, all of that is going to affect prices for goods as well. Yeah, it's very complicated. Yeah.
Professor, for the left side, the color-coded vertical line, what did you mean by same?
Yeah, so those two are represented by the same thing, right? So remember, real dollars represents purchasing power, and actual dollars represents, you know, actual amounts of physical money that you have. And so when you evaluate them at the same time period and they have the same base T, then it's the same thing. So if you have $20 today, you can buy $20 worth of stuff today as well, right?
Oh,
so,
okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Thank you.
Yep. Okay. Any other questions before we wrap it up? Thanks. Yeah. Take care of yourself too. All right. See you next week.